Hello, Internet. Welcome to that Silverline show on Tuesday. We have the wrong header up. Let me grab that real quick here. Wherever that went. Tuesday. There you go. Yeah. I'm your host, Tim TK, and you might notice he's a little quiet right now, but are joined by Jose Fuentes. Currently coming to us from the lobby of a hotel somewhere in the middle of nowhere. I hope you join us. If he's a little quiet, let me know. I'll see what I can do to fix the audio, but that is what we have for tonight. And we're going to be talking about building a comic book world. So the elements of world building, if you go through any sort of creative writing class, depending on the teacher you get, if they like genre, they're going to tell you that world building is the most important thing you can do. If you get a teacher who likes literary fiction, they're going to tell you that world building does not matter. And in comics, it's especially important to world build because there's also a strong visual component. So we are starting off the new year, so maybe we'll... I might try to be a little bit better about keeping discussions focused, but that's kind of not our thing, so we'll see how things go. But I do have some prepared questions for us to work through, and it'll let us, go from there. So whatever happens, happens. But at least we have some points to come back to.
The attempt. We make the attempt.
Exactly. If Jose is too quiet, you might just need to turn your audio up on your screens all the way. Okay, so when I think about world building, especially for genre work, and most comics are in genre, fantasy, science fiction, fantastic, what have you. Except for most Marvel stuff because it's just New York. But when I think about world building for genre, the thing I always think about is something that all of your genre enthusiastic teachers will tell you is that your world should be another main character. There's always something that grabs your attention, makes you want to know more about the world itself and not just about the people you're seeing in the world. Classically, every Potterhead wants to go to Hogwarts. Everyone who reads Lord of the Rings wants to live in Middle Earth. And it can be one of those things where even if the world is terrible in some way, you still want to be in it or immerse yourself in it because, living in Middle Earth, you're very likely to get stabbed by an orc or die by the age of 30. But, you get to live in Middle Earth, and that'd be great. So, Jose, what are kind of your thoughts on making the world its own character? What does that mean to you?
I think world building is great. As much as it is important to make the characters, give them their own personality, giving different regions of your world personality is just as important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like what you said there, giving regions personality, because we're D&D nerds, as stated on the channel many times, and that's a really good example. D&D is already separated into multiple planes, but even just in the current main universe, Faerun, with the Drist books and Baldur's Gate and all that stuff, you have Baldur's Gate, which has its own personality. You have Waterdeep. You have the Savage Frontier, Icewind Dale. Yeah, the Golden, the Silvery Marshes, and like the Golden Sands, and each thing definitely feels unique in its own thing, and you can spend hours just exploring all the corners of each individual city.
Right, and that's where my enjoyment for world building came from. I mean, like you said, we talked about role playing before, but the idea of trying to narrate and just describe the area they're at, just so that your players can get a better feel, better sense, of any foreboding you might have going on.
Right.
So I think that translates really, really well, and it's pretty important in comics as well.
Definitely, and it's one of those things that it's fun for us even just to do it because we love painting. If you're dungeon master in a game or if you create mediums, you probably like in some way painting the picture either with words or with actual art. and just seeing the knowing that when someone experiences that, they're going to be awed in some way, because that's always the joys when you describe something. Hey, pops, when you describe something in a D&D campaign, right? You want everyone at the table to be like, whoa. But
Right.
you can also like reinforce that in yourself when you experience world building. Classically, in that same vein, the opening to Skyrim, once you finally get out of the castle and you walk out the mountain path and you can actually see the world that they developed. Of course, as creators, we need to ingest media to know what we like and how to present that and create our own media. So, Jose, what are some examples of moments when like pieces of art or books or comics or movies or whatever where the world building really hit you hard?
Um, I think maybe for me it was when Marvel Comics started introducing the Savage Land.
Oh yeah.
'Cause that was like you took them in like from New York or wherever they were, with the Great Lakes Avengers and whatnot. But you would all of a sudden be transported them into an entirely different scenario, entirely different genre. All of a sudden, dinosaurs and crazy mutates everywhere and whatnot.
Yeah.
I think that was just bold. Like to me, that was like a huge jump from like what everyone is accustomed to like just flipping everything on its end.
Oh yeah, absolutely. To see in the same vein, for me, I have some experience with when they introduced Limbo, and when they continue to go back and develop later on with different characters, and you get to see a different side depending on who goes there,
Right.
and all different things that reflect like Magic's experience in Limbo is completely different from Doctor Strange's, and they have moments where they intersect. But seeing moments where they go into like there essentially is a different hell dimension that isn't exactly hell, but it operates in a weird way that's weird and tricky.
Right. Um, that gets. I mean, that that's weird to me. Like, I
Yeah,
mean, it's hard for me to grasp.
yeah,
Like, I feel like I think the physicalness of like like I said, velociraptors attacking you and
yeah.
T-Rex with that in that regard, or even when was it the X-Men were in the Outback.
Oh yeah,
You know what I mean?
yes.
Entirely different scenario, entirely different mentality, like of what they can do and what they can get away with because there was nothing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And he says something there where like you didn't grasp onto Limbo as much as I did, but you grasped onto Savage Lands more than I did. And world building can be different for everyone. Everyone has like you have some people who are more sci-fi heads, and people who are more fantasy heads, and comic people are typically somewhere in between because comics are somewhere in between. Or you can enjoy both, but enjoy different elements of both. Like some people
Right.
only like hard science fiction, or there are set rules. Whereas people like more the science fantasy, where faster than light travel because we said we can. uh, so you like more of having that. Well, for that at least, you like having the more physical grounded element of the Savage Land opposed to the wackadoo of Limbo. But if you were to go further on the scale to like science fiction or fantasy, do you also like the more grounded elements there, or do you like is there a point where you start liking the stuff that's a little more out there?
Um, I like sci-fi in that, especially like anything that's like graphic, like it's in the future. You know what I
Mm.
mean? I like that stuff like that, but for me, it's more the fantasy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And was it X of Swords, Swords of X? Um,
X of Swords.
yeah, when they started going into, I can't even remember what it's called. Avalon.
Evelyn, yeah.
You know what I mean? All of a sudden, the typical X-Men characters all of a sudden becoming medieval and whatnot. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah,
Like that's more of what I can grab a hold of. You know what I mean?
sure. I like that too. I think what my thing is I like things when there are systems, but systems that don't necessarily need to be heavily defined. So
Right.
I like Limbo because like there's a system to it, but the system was that things don't work the way you expect them to.
Right.
Uh,
So you don't have to over explain
right.
when you do goofy.
Yeah, but then when I go into like science fiction, I like things like The Expanse, where it is hard sci-fi. Like there is a clear line of theoretical science that explains why things are working the way that they are. Or then even going back to, well, I like the D&D fantasy because it's just kind of like, but even then there is a loose system to it, and that druidic
Right.
magic and ranger magic comes from the Feywild, and if you're a celestial caster, then your powers are tied from an element to some god, and things can interfere there or what have you. So there is still like a loose system, but very loosely. But I also like Brandon Sanderson's was it Stormlight Archives, where there's a very clearly defined and hard set magic system. Like, no, this is the science of magic. This is how you magic right.
Nice. Yeah,
Yeah,
I can definitely see the benefit of both. I
definitely.
just I like when I don't have to explain much.
Definitely, and there are moments too when I like things just to go absolutely but like bonkers wild. That's why I like Warhammer and stuff like that, where their explanation for faster than light travel is demon dimensions. You have to travel with the demons to go faster than light. That's how it works. There's no other way.
Right. That just makes sense, right?
Yeah, the orcs paint all their vehicles red because red is the fastest color, and because they're innately magical, they are. The red is the fastest color. So if you paint something red, it goes faster.
I think that's 8-year-old mentality because you had red tennis shoes, you ran faster than everybody else.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Um. So yeah, definitely. Now we kind of went over stuff we like and why we like it and why we think you like it. Writing and world building. You'd almost think that the certainly in you know traditional books, the onus is on the writer to build the world because that's all there is to it. He's just text on a page, and
Right.
it's your job as the writer to show everything. So, but in comics, as a writer, I don't want to say you get an easier job in the world building, but you get a different job, and it's not on you to paint the picture. You provide the scaffolding and the outlines, and then the artist will actually assemble the world within that. Yeah. Um, so uh, there are different ways to go about that. The way I write, I find that right, lends itself to world building really well, and I think you can see that in Wolf Hunter, and then eventually when Soul Senate comes out, you'll be able to see that. Writing essentially full outlines beforehand, and then full script where each panel has its own description, because I'm trying to paint the picture in my head as much as I can for the artist to then interpret and paint their own picture, sometimes literally. Um, and somewhere along the line that matches the dialogue, and then the reader gets the final version of the world. But you get them getting this really cool exchange where the world has essentially been built 3 times. First by
Right.
the in the head of the writer, then in the head of the artist, and then it finally gets interpreted, and the pages and the spaces in between the panels gets completed by the reader. So as the artist or inker, or however you position yourself in that timeline, Jose, as the more artistically inclined person in the process, how do you feel about that process, and what do you like about it?
I mean, I think I said it before
Yes, definitely.
that I, that I like working like if I'm doing any kind of work, even if I'm creating of anything, any world and whatnot, like keep in contact with the writer, right? Like because I've created like especially for role playing, I've created an entire
Oh yeah.
map everything out. You know what I mean? What is over here? What's over here? You know the climate and whatnot, and just for everyone to play in about this much of the whole thing.
Yes. Yes.
But it explains like where a particular character came from and like just the regional stuff, like I said. But I am I actually enjoy that. I know it sounds weird to some people, but I actually enjoy that. That's fun. And
Mm.
being a part of that and so from a creative point of view, like if the writer is descriptive, that just makes it that much more enjoyable, I think.
No, yeah.
Because yeah, you can as an artist you still put in your own feels, you put in your own, concept, your own what's the word? Your own inspiration, I guess, into it. But that inspiration still comes from what the writer wrote. And
Mm.
if the writer's descriptive, then I think that that just lends to really like helping like a very like vibrant world.
Definitely. And I think you said something cool there. That's if the writer's descriptive, it can help provide inspiration for the artist. And I think a lot of new writers, when they get into it, they're afraid of am I being too handholdy for the artist? Am I being too domineering?
Right.
Am I not giving enough? And I think there is. I think if you're ever a writer, you should always go on the side of giving more, kind of whatever medium. The only exception being exposition. If you limit your exposition at most times, if possible, but unless you're creating, an apocrypha style book, because people pick up your apocryphas because people like worlds. But
Right.
Always on the side of providing more detail. I mean, there's something like you can be controlling to an artist if you get to the point where you're spending an entire page describing one panel, essentially saying it needs to be exactly this way. But if you're describing the exact motion being taken, the style of what everyone is wearing, the type of room it is, if there's something that's important to the plot or something that is important to the character, mention it, because the artist isn't going to read your mind from, however many miles away. But, provide as much detail as you can. Because, unless you're taking a full page, you're probably giving the artist just food for them to churn out more stuff, because if you and also provide references, if you're asking for
specifically want like there has to be this concrete statue of an eagle staring down while picking its nose with the claw, and that's detrimental to the story. So like if you have a reference or something like that you like specifically want in there, but this Maltese Falcon has to look like this.
Right.
That's
definitely important. Like I wrote a comic and I had to essentially reference like he's wearing scale mail in the style of scale mail in the style of Lorca Sigmentatum, which is the Roman imperial scaled plate.
Right.
I don't expect every artist to know that, so I just found something off Pinterest attached to it and is off with it. It's like it's not exactly this. This is just the style for his sci-fi armor. So.
I did that for I basically call it a murderboard. I did that when I had designed characters for school, and one of them was I think it's Cebu, which is like cousin to water buffalo. I picked Cebu and wore like a Turkish armor. It's leather plate, or not leather plate, but leather panels all over the place.
Yeah.
So I had to describe what that looked like and pull up references for that. That was a blast.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's very hard to go overboard with details as the writer in comics. And if your artist does have an issue with it, they'll let you know when they should. Maintain healthy communication. But and that's just kind of one part of it, because you also spend time, like Jose had said, depending on how deep you want it, you might need to create a map or create systems and infrastructure and all this other stuff. Writing Wolf Runner, luckily I didn't have that issue, because London is a real place and it exists. But I did have to figure out how fast did trains run back in 1940, and what was the time from how long would the train ride from London to the northwestern ports be? What would the weather be like?
So did you do that to help with pacing?
Yeah. Help with pacing, okay, is this going to be does the story take place in one day? Is it take place over 2 days? Would there be a sleeper cabin on this train? Or were they still running private cabins at this point? And also, fun fact, there's actually a lot of private cabins on trains, because all the big public cabins got requisitioned for supply trains.
Right.
And working all this other stuff into that. And it is fun going through and just kind of researching and building out your own storyboard. Like your board, or your world. I'll go into the big two later on, but what they call it would be the story Bible. more often than not, at least if you're independent, like you're going to have more text in that document than you will in your finished product.
Right.
Yeah.
True.
I think, well, depending now, because Batman, I think, had the record for the biggest Bible. Of course, there's a ton of Batman things, but I believe they need to update the Bible several times a year because there was one of the few properties where, like, yeah, just introduce new characters all the time. We kind of don't care. Just make new characters. um, yeah. I know also some people have their favorite parts. For me, I'm always a fan of the. Again, I didn't really need to do this for Wolf Hunter because it was Allied England and Nazi Germany, but for other things, I like creating the political and governmental structures. Uh, which empires are worth who. Which small kingdoms or duchies are working with what. Uh, is there a spy in this kingdom who's doing this for another thing? Blah 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 blah. Because you're going to end up creating more characters the way you go down that, and characters provide some of the best plot hooks that tie you back into the world. I know some people get really into the economics too. I do lightly, but I know some people are all about like there's a river here, so that means that they probably do. They have like a wood shoot, and they probably have good farming. So this is an agricultural town, and they probably trade with this place, which is a mercantile kingdom. Well, so Jose, what are kind of your favorite parts of world building? What kind of things do you really dig into when you're creating?
Not that. I like. I mean, other than terrain, I enjoy describing terrain, especially when it comes to like in regards to like different adventures that I've done. You know what I mean? Describing like ancient ruins or statues and stuff like that. Like that stuff I like to explain. I like to describe.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
like you're gonna have a jungle and there's gonna be a overrun temple there. Like it's role playing. Of course it's gonna be. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
The best part is to explain it. The best part is to describe it. Like it's mosquito buzzing around their faces and stuff like that.
Mm,
Um, some of that I can translate into comics.
yeah.
Um, but most of my experience with world building was with role playing,
Oh, yeah.
and um, I don't like getting into. I like getting into the lore. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's a history here. There's a story that was told for this particular relic or this particular like destroyed temple. So like that's the stuff I like. I like the legend stuff as opposed to like the political intrigue.
Yeah.
Probably because politics doesn't appeal to me. I mean, I literally had to ask people what certain things meant about our government
Oh,
because I didn't understand.
sure.
And thankfully, they didn't laugh at me too hard when they explained it.
Yes. Well, the nice thing about writing, I'll go. I like to go for a web of Buddhism. Yes, I like.
Yep.
I do a lot of vampire. I think, well, vampire especially, but with writing my version of science fiction and the fantasy I like to. The nice thing is I can kind of avoid all modern day politics and base it mostly off of Roman politics or the politics surrounding like the late Middle Ages, the creation of Magna Carta. How did like all the like the Barons' Rebellion? What did that political structure look like? Or even the Reconquista of Spain. Like the politics there weren't as clean cut as you might think, because there are a lot of people who kind of were working for either side or didn't know what it said. There were some Moorish dukes who were working with Spanish kings, some Spanish dukes who were working with the Moorish kings, the Caliphate, and El Cid, the knight who worked for both sides, got
Right.
married. El Cid is one of my favorite characters from history. But so I like that type of politics. If I had to go to create a world where, well, maybe if I get too deep into the Roman stuff, I might need to. But having like 3 days of filibuster discussions, that might be a little too much on the political intrigue. But
Six years later.
Yeah, exactly. I think the two things you said there are also really important for creating a world that sticks with the reader, and that is the lore and also the minute details that really paint the image. So the minute details, like you said, the mosquito buzzing around their head that they have to swat away,
Right.
whatever. And you can even do that in comics, where if someone's going to some place that they do in comics all the time, they're in a volcano or whatever. Just you can reference it in text, or you can just show dude sweating, or like even change the way their costumes are designed, like the X-Men changing their costumes, working the Outback, and all this other stuff. Or even when now the change in costumes going to Krakoa, and everyone's now wearing more sleek, futuristic, and very militaristic type outfits, or it looks like, oh, these guys are actually in some sort of uniform, because they're
Except for Marauders are like pirates.
exactly. we gotta. Well, even then, I mean, that's a good example, because you have the Marauders, who are essentially the golden age of piracy buccaneers working for Krakoa.
Right.
And they're dressed like pirates. So you have a panda wearing a headband. Yes. Okay.
You do.
Yeah, but one of my favorite things is with X-Force, we get a tactical Black Tom Cassidy. Black Tom being like one of the weirdest dudes, but he got rid of the collar. He's just wearing a tighter vest, bandoliers.
I like Black Tom back in the day. Was it with the black and red outfit that he had?
The black and red, yeah. They brought back the black and red color scheme, but they just changed the way it looks. It looks like he's not just some guy who crawled out of the vines. Even though he spends most of his time crawling out of the vines.
Right.
And the other thing being the what's it called? Oh, the lore. The history, because that's what makes the world seem lived in. You don't need to, create you can create a full 1,000 years of history of who knows who's, and George R. Martin did that, and perhaps that's why we're not getting book 6 anytime soon for Game of Thrones. But giving each region how the X-Files interconnect is glorious, I agree. That's one of the reasons why it's like the only mainline comic that I still read, is because of how how much brain power the editor seems to put into the X-Files. Because it's always a different team, but I feel like Marvel always gets like the editor who's okay with getting the least amount of sleep and just like pouring over everything to work on those. But creating small legends and fables about towns, like, oh, we don't know how we got founded, but this is what my grandma told me, and all this stuff, for giving characters their own lore and backgrounds. And if you create a religious or god system for your world, what's the creation mythos? What is are the gods active or inactive, and what's the reason? Therefore, was there a schism and the gods had to leave, or was there some fight? The gods like, okay, we need to watch over everyone, so we're gonna stay here now, or put like sentinels. Kind of like thinking about the Colossus of Rhodes. The gods are fighting, like, well, humans are kind of dumb, so we're gonna put some titans outside of Rhodes to make sure that people don't kill the city.
Right. I like the idea of adding pantheons to a story, or a world as well. Like that, you just mentioned that, but that's actually, that helps to define some of the characters. Like some people in this village, they may be like overly devout, and then even taking aspects of real life. Like, say, if you take a particular region and they are very much like Amish people, you know what I mean? Like, you have the Amish of any fantasy world on that. I know it's fantasy world regardless, but like, then you have people in like cities, like, like major cities that look down upon them. It's like, I mean, what happens here too, like regardless of whether it's Amish people or any other culture that is different than the norm, than the status quo. So that's interesting to include that into it. Like, man, there's so much you can do when you build worlds. Seriously.
Absolutely. We just created characters for a one shot, or not one shot. We created the Session 0 for our new campaign, which is going to be we actually opted to do a long form campaign, so hopefully we can ruin the DM's lives over the next 2 years. I'm not DMing this one, which is going to be fun actually to play again. But the world he created, he did something kind of similar where he wanted to mirror kind of the Reformation, but take it to extreme.
Interesting.
Also mirror that. So the idea is that there's two main gods, the embodiment of order, the embodiment of chaos, and at some point the gods fractured and each became two. So you end up getting the people that worship the old personality of order, and then the reformers worship the new personality. And the same thing happens with the chaos pantheon. And kind of looking at the creating of denominations within that, what if that was actually like a little representation of, the gods splitting apart? So essentially more churches fracture off that are all, denominations of the same church worshiping the same god figure, but they all believe in a different aspect of him more so than the other ones do. So the god of order is also, a part of him is the god of agriculture and all this other stuff. And so, and because that, getting a ton of churches to grow up, so it ends up creating like a very like faith-based society where like it's impossible to escape. Every town has its own separate church, which may or may not be related to something else. And the same way that your artist can interpret the world that you create and run with it, as a player or as a reader, you're going to interpret something and run with it your own way. So if you're a writer who is inheriting some established world building to create a new story in, which, in comics, so it happens more so than other mediums. If you end up getting picked up by a publisher with a long-running title, like, hey, we want you to write a series based in here, go do it. You don't necessarily need to go buy the book. You can find ways to play around with it. So what I did with my character, I used 2 books. I used the Eberron lore book to choose my race, and the Tasha's Cauldron to pick my subclass. So I'm a Kalashtar Psy Warrior fighter. So very psionic based, but the way we're flavoring it is that my character at one point was in the Job Got Ron. He's like a mob enforcer. At Job Goes Run, he dies, wakes up 100 yards away. He recently resurrected, and there is now something else inside of his body, which he quickly learns to understand. It's a spirit, which may or may not be from this world, but there is a spirit which has escaped the afterlife, which he's been told like there's a set afterlife that works this way. And now there's a spirit that is co-inhabiting his body and giving him psionic powers. So his whole thing now was like, man, I gotta like catch up on my religion and figure this out.
Right.
So he's a mafia-based character, so he's like a little inherently selfish. So his first thought is, well, if this thing that's haunting me escaped the afterlife, maybe I can too, and maybe that's my best bet at getting some level of immortality.
Wow, that's pretty in-depth, dude.
It's pretty in-depth. Yeah, it's fun. But yeah, that's the way you kind of think about, you're presented this world within it, and you're like, okay, what are some tools I can use to play with that? When you're writing something that's set in a world, or if you're writing historical fiction, you're presented the world, but you don't necessarily need to present that world in exactly that way. You can find ways to play with it. That's kind of the same way I think you need to think about it. It's like writing Wolf Hunter. I didn't just want to write the story of the Tizard mission in a very straightforward retelling of World War II history. I wanted to create a spy story in there. So what's a plausible way to play around with that? And how can I fit in something that is unique and interesting in a story which is at this point set history?
Right. I have a comment on that. I drew a blank. Sorry.
No problem. Let's see there. We did get a chat. I'm kind of working on a modified Japanese mythological system set in San Francisco, which is fun to work with. Nice. Definitely makes me think of Blade Runner or Shadowrun. I love also Ghostwire, sci-fi Japanese mythos. But yeah, I mean that's a fun way. You're presented with the Japanese mythology and the city of San Francisco, which are two set things, but how do you combine the two and find ways to play around with them or explore it in ways that may not have been done before?
Yeah, that gives you options. You know what I mean? You have like pre-generated like reality, I guess. You have San Francisco, the buildings that people are going to recognize. You want to make sure that people are going to recognize the buildings so they recognize the location
Yeah.
and then go crazy with all the neo
Yeah.
stuff into it.
And that's like, yeah, whole thing where you can like, how do you like fit in like, have a wind spirit fight Oni on Salesforce Tower, or like how do you
Right.
incorporate like the what's the city tram, all of other fun stuff in there. Um, so I did actually have our next question here. So kind of going over all different things we like to research at world building, all the things we like to play around with it. When you're starting to build a new world or starting to work within a new world that a writer's presented to you, or what is kind of your starting point for research? What do you dive into first?
Um, I think for me, like I said before, it's history. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if I want to create a history, I create a part of a world. Like I said, people playing about that big of it, right?
Yeah.
But I ended up having a desert area, and I was playing a lot of was the Stone Prophets, Ravenloft Stone Prophets. So
Yeah.
I really wanted like an Egyptian feel to it, and you know what I mean. Like the sand itself was trying to kill people, and even though the players never ever went in that direction, but I had it set up ready to go. But it's always like searching, like I guess the references that I look up. You know what I mean, if I see a picture that I like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean, I want to incorporate that in. But that's part of the research for me. What animals would be in this climate? What you know what I mean? What is what's going to grow here? I like stuff like that. Like I know, like you said, mentioned people like the politics part and whatnot, but I like researching what flora, fauna is going to be in this particular area. Like I'm not going to have an oak tree full of lush leaves and whatnot in
Right.
like an Arctic area because then it's going to be so out of place. Like anybody that even has a remote interest in that in real life is going to be like, oh, that must be a plot thing because
Right.
tree is growing. And I'm just like, oh no, I'm just a moron that didn't know it couldn't be there.
You don't want
So
to
I like to look at my references. I like to keep my references.
definitely. You don't want to create an accidental critical role chair where the chairs are so out of place that everyone gets focused on it for over an hour.
You're right.
Oh, definitely.
But that incorporates into like into comics because
Mm-hmm.
my comic Devil Boy, it's it's set in like a Serengeti temperate type of like region, and I say Serengeti just because I like the trees that are there. It's very flat. It's very like a plain area, and off in the distance you see, you can see the mountain
Yeah.
ranges and whatnot. But like there isn't much to hide behind. There isn't much to, what I mean, in the pictures that I have for reference anyway. So everything is up front. Everything is like you see it coming, so you're trying to protect yourself or defend yourself as such, right?
Right.
So when I was creating the landscape for Devil Boy, that included I had to include that fact that there's not going to be hills or like giant like forests for people to hide behind. You know what I mean? When
Right.
it comes to the antagonist for Devil Boy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like everything's going to be up front, and as much as I don't necessarily do subterfuge, I had to stretch myself and like work to include some of that. Otherwise, everyone's gonna see everything coming, and I kind of want to hope to surprise people. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? So I take the landscape into that effect as well, like
Yeah.
how the players, how the characters in the story are gonna see. Like I said, they're gonna see everything coming. Nothing's gonna be like, oh, there's an undercover night. Everything is up front.
Yeah.
So how do you defend yourself against something that you know it's coming, and more importantly, how do you how do you like not so much trick, but how do you like outwit someone that sees your actions as well?
Yeah. Yeah. I think what was also interesting with writing Wolf Hunter and me being more focused on like writing the research and doing like the political intersection stuff, end up running into creating similar issue and then overcoming that, creating a spy story that's all set on one terrain, right? Everything seems like it should be up front, but you need to create layers of subterfuge to get around that. So I had to research reasons why people would lie but still be good people or be innocent people. So essentially, I ended up creating a variation of a train, right, of London, where this guy's stuck on a train full of liars, and he's trying to find one liar in a group of people who all have something to hide. And so that's a line I think he actually has coming up towards the end of it, where he says like everyone is lying about the wrong thing. It's like It's like I work about their lies, but I need them to lie about the right thing before we figure out what's happening. And so you end up having like on the political on the political personal side of that, whereas you had to research like how do people move at night, what would you use to find terrain and cover, like how would you avoid something that is coming when like it seems like any sort of like cover is very scarce,
right?
Whereas I'm looking at okay, why would nobility want to lie at this time period? Why would a commoner or like some person who's just going from London to Surrey or whatever, why would they need to lie? Why would or Dover, and finding things about like, well, at that point, a lot of people were losing a lot of money to the war because they're essentially selling off giant plots of land. So a lot of nobles that were previously well-to-do were now suddenly on the verge of going bankrupt. And so they had to lie to keep amends or do back alley deals in order to get land back and all this other stuff. Dealing with the fact that even though England is part of the Allies, if you were Romani or Jewish, you weren't necessarily welcome to disclose that openly to people because they thought you were part of the problem. And so kind of finding new ways to essentially make people liars when when the hero wants them not to be, but the story demands that they lie. How do you find liars in 1940s England? And so you're just kind of stealing real lies that people would have kept hidden and then putting them in a location. The same way that you would find, real elements of maneuvering and staying hidden and put that into a geographical biome.
That is a lot.
Yeah, that's the fun ways to think about role playing is you're essentially you're creating something by pulling things that happen and then putting them into your own setting and putting your own little spin on it.
Right, and those are like little for like character nuances and whatnot that help like create like the layers for, like you said, like the story on a train. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
At its base core, it's a story on a train, and you have to create those layers that keep people wanting to peel and look.
Yeah.
And where's this headed? And, like, it wasn't necessarily. I mean, other than like historically, like I know that there's a Quentin Cathedral in one of the pages for the Christmas book, I think.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, you can have that. He did. They did two things that Richard required a ton of reference. The first is he did the interior of St. Martin's on the Field.
Yeah.
Did it scanned in. The other one was the exterior of the BBC a day after a British bombing run had dropped essentially an aerial mine that detonated on the fifth story window.
Right.
So you had to find like
So
the right location to put that marking in.
those aren't necessarily like, I mean, those are like aspects of the world that helps to like fill in spots on this train wreck story.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like
You know what I mean?
it's little things where that's not all the world's defined by, but you do those little details. It's like the guy swatting the flies away and he's walking through a swamp. It's a little
Right.
thing like, oh, something happened here that caused us to look this way, or like this is an actual event that people go to, and it has pretty significant significance, which is why they're using this big church. They're using this big church in the middle of still being bombed by the Germans. So you end up creating these levels of implied significance or implied history to the events surrounding the characters.
And that's cool. Like I dig that a lot. You know,
Yeah.
because to me, those are just like added things to it, like just to strengthen the story.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That just for some things, like I said, when we're talking about like in Amazon style rainforest and overrun ancient temple and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Those little stories that like the villagers are telling
Right.
about the area. Each person is going to have a different story that they're telling. But like if you laid them all in a row diagonally, they all tell the
Yeah.
truth. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's fun. Like in introducing that, you know what I mean, into a story where I think it's a little to me anyway, and I haven't tried it yet. I'll be honest. But trying to incorporate that into a comic book story, I think is a little different.
Oh yeah.
You would almost have to like lay the panels out all across and then have each person tell the story, just slowly work its way across.
Yes.
You know what I mean? The page, so you can see that each person had a little bit of it. But when in regards to role playing, like that's easy. Like just have them go. Like the people are going to go. Your players are going to go and investigate it, and you're just like, well, yeah, this person. And me personally, for like a story like that, I tend to write it out. That way, when I'm actually like telling the story, I'm actually reading what I wrote. That way, I know,
Yeah.
where to line up at.
Definitely. There is some interesting ways you can. I think if you work well with your artists, there are some interesting ways you can almost kind of do that in comics as well. Like you had said, where you need to lay each thing out differently in a panel, but you can still make that visually interesting, depending on how wacky you guys are willing to get with the panel structure.
Right.
There was, and also you need to be okay with abridging scenes, which I know some writers like the darlings, but if you can abridge a scene and get the reader the information in a way that is much more compelling than talking heads, I choose that all the time. But there was, I think, was it Department of Truth? Oh, it was that or something else, where essentially the protagonist had done a series of interviews to complete an investigation. But instead of showing us each individual interview, they are in what is like a church with a stained glass window, but they turned all the stained glass into a different panel. So each piece of stained glass is a different character, and it's their part that creates the full truth in that section of stained glass.
That's neat. That's nice effect.
Yeah, I'm always find ways to abridge storytelling and find ways to get wacky with the panel structure because that'll allow you to, make the characters and the world that much more alive, because you're unveiling the truth about the world in a way that makes the characters much more digestible.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it has been just about an hour. I don't know if we'll go for a full 90 minutes today. I think we'll let Jose get back up to his hotel room in the hotel lobby. But yeah, any final thoughts, Jose, on world building?
Those teachers that prefer the literary aspect and only want to create characters and whatnot, I will fail that class.
I know. Yeah, literary fiction is I appreciate it, and I have written and published some, but it's, you know, you can only write about a person having an epiphany while a kettle boils over so many times.
Right.
Yeah, it's. I need my robots with laser eyes and my giant dragons.
Right. No kidding. And enjoy your thesaurus.
Yeah,
Like, seriously, when it comes to describing your world, when it comes to like talking about it, like saying this, oh yeah, this cool part right here, and it's cool because of that, and the cool part about it is, dude, come on,
yeah,
there's a source for a reason.
definitely. Oh, I think that's also probably something important to mention before you do go on is, you know, I give this advice all the time, and every other writer does. You know, is don't over-explain. You know, show don't tell, all that stuff. But don't confuse that with cutting all the detail. Like when you're creating a world and you're creating a world building, turn it into an absolute meal.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. If you like,
I've had where I was doing artwork for a story, and it was it didn't last very long. Me working for this, but they the I guess the writer was like pretty descriptive, like, oh, this character is doing this, and I think he was flipping in the air to kick somebody, and very descriptive about kicking them with the left foot and whatnot, but like didn't tell me at all where they were.
oh yeah,
I'm like, that's a great scene in the air.
yes,
Like, where is this happening? Like,
right,
you're not understanding. So yeah,
yeah,
be, be generous with your descriptions.
definitely. Different descriptions. For as a writer working with if you're working with a different artist, the establishing shot works for two reasons. One, it gives the readers context and it allows you to be descriptive and really create that like world building meal where it's like we get to see everything about where they are, and you can see all the cool toys that we've created for the reader to enjoy the universe. But also it works for the artist because now you grounded them like this thing is happening here.
Right. And
Yeah.
we were taught like sometimes like it's okay to like create your establishing shot, and then you don't have to worry about it the rest of the film.
Oh yeah, yeah,
You know, depending on how the story plays out, you don't have to worry about the rest of the film. But it's like they're at a cafe. Be very descriptive about the cafe you're doing, and then it's just a matter of heads talking.
Mhm.
You know, there's different angles as an artist. There's different angles that you'll take to expedite getting that page done. You know what I mean? Without sacrificing, the imagination of where they're at and what's going on.
absolutely. Every Avengers comic get to the mid comic splash. You get the helicarrier.
Yeah.
It exists for a reason. It's cool. It looks cool, but also it sets the scene.
Right.
Yeah. All right. My cat's eating my other cat's food, so I'm gonna throw a penny at him real quick. Down the head. All right. But yeah, that has been that's what show on Tuesday. I've been Tim TK, joined by Jose Fuentes. You have been you, dear chatters. We'll be back next week. And I do actually have a subject this time. Let me pull that up real quick. Next week we will be talking about where did it go? There's next week is the 10th, and we're talking about comics and color theory. So, if you're a colorist, or if you, if you enjoy painting at all, like I will be bringing. Even though I don't do any comic art, I can bring some, relevant subjects because I do paint miniatures and portraits and busts all the time. So that's my thing. So I'll be bringing some color theory in there from a painter's perspective as well.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
I got a couple thoughts on that.
Okay, cool. Be sure to check out 8 p.m. Eastern Time, Wednesday and Sunday for Wednesday Wham and Silver Sunday. We'll be back next week, 8 p.m. Pacific Time on Tuesday. But until that time, make mine Silverline.
Silverline.
Hey, I'm Pat Broderick. Make mine Silverline.